Welcome to Seeing Through Ancient Eyes, where I share unexpected insights about Torah, diving into the ancient Near East culture to uncover how much more better our God is than any other power that you might ever want to put your hope or your trust in. I'm Gail Heaton, and I want to welcome you if this is your first time here. And I want to let you know that what I do each week is I take a little bite-sized piece of ancient Near East culture for you that I've drawn from the week's Torah portion. And I do this so that you can better understand the culture that the Torah was given. Because when you know what the ancients were up against, you can get a greater sense of how God met them right where they needed him to. And when you can see what he's done for the ancients, you might just trust him even more in your own life. So we are in the second Torah portion for Exodus. It's called Va'era, and that means, and he appeared. So we're going to talk about rescue in this lesson. I'm not sure that we always know that we need rescuing. And I think that even when we do know, I'm not sure that we always expect God to be the one to intervene. So, for example, like in my life, there's especially when I was younger, there were many times where I was in over my head about something, and I just assumed that that's the way that it had to be. And so I kind of wandered through life, kind of looking down, blinders on, trying to endure difficulties all on my own. And I wonder, what's sadder, not knowing you need rescuing, or trying, you know it, but you don't expect the rescue to come from God. And so, I wonder, did the Israelites know that they needed rescuing? At what point did they know that, right? Had they along the way kind of given into the inevitable, that slavery in Egypt? Little bit at a time, that slow fade, the proverbial frog in the water. Did they know they needed rescuing, but they didn't expect help from God? In the last chapter, I discussed that it was after the Israelites cried out, but not even necessarily cried out to God, that God then moved on their behalf, right? So I wonder, at certain times, did some of them become complacent or numb to what was happening to them, that they didn't think to cry out earlier, before the new Pharaoh came to power? I don't know. Like, was it just that they knew that the new Pharaoh had this responsibility to ease their suffering, and that's what triggered their crying out? Or had things gotten so bad for them that at that particular moment, that it sort of jolted them out of their stupor and caused them to remember their oral history that's been passed down through the generations? That history would have included the prophecy that God gave to Abram that we read in Genesis 15. So that's Genesis 15:13. Know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and they'll be enslaved and mistreated there. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterward they will come out with great possessions. And it's interesting, during this time where the Israelites were crying out for rescue, it included up to and including when Moses was at the burning bush talking with God. Exodus 6:8. Therefore, say to the Israelites, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. I will free you from being slaves to them. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with mighty acts of judgment. I will take you as my people, and I will be your God. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God, who brought you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. And I will bring you to the land I swore with uplifted hands to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I will give it to you as a possession. I am the Lord. I will bring you out. I will free you. I will redeem you. I will take you as my own. So let's talk about these extraordinary I will statements, these I will promises. And I want you to see your story there, okay? Your own rescue from the Egypt of slavery to sin and unbelonging. All right. Now, you know, the holiday of Passover that commemorates all of these events, right? And in the retelling, those of us who celebrate, we're encouraged to believe as if we ourselves have come out from Egypt. So, we can look at these I will statements as 4 stages of the Exodus. Okay? We've got 4 Hebrew words at play here. Yatzah, to go out, to go forth. Natsal, to deliver, rescue, save. Ga'al, to redeem, to ransom, to do the work of the kinsman. And Lakah, to take, to get, to acquire, to marry, to lay hold of. Okay, first one. I will bring you out. This is the first stage in God's plan to bring his people out of Egypt. Specifically, it means to bring him out from under the burdens of the oppressors of Egypt. Okay, so that root there in that word is just one Hebrew word, and it's the same word in Genesis 1:12. The earth brought forth grass and plants and trees. So the idea then is that God brings us out of something to create something new. And in this case, he brought the Israelites out of slavery to create a nation whose king is God, a nation that has just and righteous laws of citizenship, right? Torah that's crafted by the Creator himself. He brings the low high. He unshackled the chains that they had, right? Their lives that were bound up in sin. And what's so great is he proclaimed with that same voice that spoke creation into being, that function and purpose. He proclaimed that we are his. We have value. We are worth the fight. So we're brought forth in order that we bring forth fruitfulness of good deeds to those around us. But God doesn't bring children the easy way. It costs everyone involved. And we get squeezed in the process, right? That Hebrew Mitzrayim, kind of like the birth canal. And then later we're going to read that once the Israelites were freed, God didn't choose the shortest route to Canaan, which would have been through the land of the Philistines, right? So part of the answer that he, for why he chose a different route, is that God didn't want the Israelites thinking that Pharaoh had any part in bringing them out, because our redemption is tied into our trust with God, right? So I learned this from Rico Cortez of Wisdom and Torah Ministries. At this time period, the kingdom of Egypt extended to include the lands throughout this route of the route to the Philistines. Okay, this was an imperial military road that was under Egyptian control. So, according to the standards of the ancient Near East, if the Israelites had traveled on this Egyptian-controlled road through the land of the Philistines to get to where they wanted to go, just by their very traveling on this road, it would have demonstrated a continued recognition of and support for Pharaoh's headship over them. Interesting, right? So the route would send the message that they still considered him their patron. But when God brings you out, he wants you to come out the entire way. So Rico Cortez teaches that there was this process that would have occurred if the Israelites left Egypt by Pharaoh's royal highway. Okay. They would have been given something kind of similar to a stamp of approval. I'm thinking like a passport stamp, that would be presented at every border patrol along the way. So the protocol involved the border guards would open up the barrier, and they would report to Pharaoh's representatives that his subjects, the Israelites, had passed through by his approval. And then the reciprocal protocol would be that the Israelites would then need to dispatch letters of thanks showing their subservience to the king. Can't serve two masters. So traveling through this royal highway, that would have been the proper way to exit Egypt. Okay. And if done according to all the protocols, probably Pharaoh would not have pursued them. That's a speculation. But the vassal king or the lesser king, they're duty bound to into the service of the suzerain king. Okay. At the slightest bidding of the king, the greater king. So anytime, so what this means is like at the suzerain's bidding, for whatever reason, the vassals would then have to forfeit their own independence as a kingdom unto themselves, and they would have to go back into return to the service of the Pharaoh. Okay, but God wants us completely brought out from worldly entanglements. So sometimes the hard road is the only way to stay free. The second great I will statement is I will free you. And the root verb for free you, that natsal, it means to draw away from. So the next stage is kind of preliminary to redemption. And it involves the drawing away or the removal of the oppressor. Okay? Because we first need to be removed from our bondage and our oppressors before we can be redeemed. Now, God is very much against idolatry, and his charge against idolatry is that these false gods or powers, they're not really our allies. They're actually our oppressors, and he doesn't want us to return to them. All right. Now, when I know for in my life, when God's process of removal is slow, it kind of chafes against my instant gratification mindset, right? And I I tend to be impatient, or I see like that time lag as a sign that God, well, he doesn't really care after all. And so I think for me and maybe for you, it takes us being plugged into God through prayer and through remembering this Exodus story so that we can stay the course during rescues that, as we used to say when I lived down south, runs like cold molasses. The first time that Natsal is used is in Genesis 31:9. He's taken away Laban's livestock, and God basically takes away Laban's livestock and gives them to Jacob. We use first mention of a word sometimes in a Bible study. It kind of can help in deriving the meaning of the word when it's later used. So Natsal, it implies like a transfer of ownership. That's one of the meanings it can mean. Okay, a transfer of ownership. So when God says that he will free the Israelites, this meant more than just freeing them from one master to another. The Israelites learned in time that they were not actually freed from service to Pharaoh into service of no one or into the service of themselves, but ownership was transferred from Pharaoh to God. So you and I are freed from serving sin, the sin that harms us, so that we can serve God, the one that helps us. And in doing so, we can be a blessing to those around us, and we can draw them near to God. Dr. Skip Moen taught me this, that freedom in this sense doesn't mean that I don't have a master, because that's the lie in the garden, that we'll be like God. We don't have one over us, right? Because freedom to live as I see fit, that's a life of unattachment. It's a life of lone survival, right? Where I don't have anyone to belong to and no one to lean on but myself. So God frees us from that. He frees us from that mindset so that he can take us as his own. Now, in our modern times, our sort of independent sensibilities that might kind of shirk at the thought that God owns us, but to the ancients, using this sort of language would not have been ill-fitting for them, because it would have meant that he then had an obligation to care for us. All right? But the key here isn't this concept. The key is who's going to be the one who's taking care of you. And God is setting the stage and telling us that he alone is worthy of this task. So the next I will statement is I will redeem you. Hebrew word ga'al, and it can mean to buy back bloodkin. So that would be relatives, common ancestry. Buy back from debt or slavery. We see that in Leviticus 25. And so this person, this redeemer, this is a person who's the nearest relative of another, and they have the duty of restoring the rights of another and avenging the wrongs. Okay? So the duty was to redeem or to purchase back a relative who had been sold into slavery. And the word can also mean to avenge, as a blood relative avenges a wrong that's done to their kinsman. We see that in Numbers 35. But it's bloodkin, it's not outsiders that are being served. Okay? And the ties that exist between members of a family, they were very, very important in the ancient Near East. The continuity of kinship is central to the Bible. So, according to ancient Near East legalities, the kinsman redeemer had to be a family member, and specifically someone strong acting on behalf of someone who's weak, to turn the weak person's bad circumstances into good. Okay? Can you hear the covenant language there? The stronger partner, God, aiding the weaker partner, us. And then this redeemer had to be capable of paying the redemption price. We see this in the book of Ruth, right? Ruth is both historic and prophetic, because the concept of a kinsman redeemer ultimately describes one of the roles of Messiah in the redemption of the land of Israel, the redemption of God's people, and in judgment. So just as the ancient kinsman redeemer was duty bound to family only, no outsiders, that's also how it is with God's family. So foreigners that are outside of God's family, they don't have this kind of provision apart from being included in the family. So Gentiles were, and they still can be, grafted into the Commonwealth of Israel, and then their family, right? And we see this in Ephesians 2:11-13. Therefore, remember that formerly you who are Gentiles by birth and called uncircumcised by those who call themselves the circumcision, which is done in the body by human hands, remember that at that time you were separate from Messiah, excluded from citizenship in Israel, and foreigners to the covenants of the promise, without hope, without God in the world. But now, in Yeshua Messiah, you who were once far away have been brought near by the blood of Messiah. The next one is, I will take you as my own people. Okay? I will take you for my people, and I will be your God. That is ancient Near East language for legal and binding adoption. Adoptive fathers bestowed sonship with this declared statement, you are my son or my daughter, I will be your father. And the Hebrew verb there, lakah, means to purposely take something or someone onto oneself to make a treasured place for it in one's home and in one's heart. Isn't that beautiful? I learned that from Bill Bullock. And that reminds me of how the Israelites took a lamb for Passover, bringing it into their home, inspecting it, caring for it, right? So God takes the Israelites and those that grafted in to be his own people, But the people need to welcome the offer, right? And continue accepting it. And much can get in the way of our taking hold of that truth. We see with the Israelites, frequent petitions, to return to Egypt when they were on the road to redemption. And that kind of mirrors our own longings to return to our own places of bondage, right? It's human nature to return to the familiar, even if the familiar is harmful. That's why God's always trying to say, don't go back to those idols. Don't go back to those false gods. Don't go back to that false thinking. And this new life with God, it was unfamiliar to the Israelites because they'd been steeped in Egyptian culture of polytheism, where the gods didn't care about the people. So in a lot of ways, what God was offering them and what he offers us is this life of vulnerability and dependence to him, trusting that he stands alone above all the other powers. And this is an extreme dependence, and it would have been difficult for them to lean into because they were accustomed to sort of pacing out their loyalty to all these multiple gods, and they would have been accustomed to the survival mechanism, probably forged in the brick banking pits of slavery, right? So these "I will" statements, I want you to know, I hope you get this, that they were unlike anything anyone in the ancient world would have ever heard of from any of the gods. This God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, he alone expected this level of intimacy and trust that the Israelites were not used to and they never expected. It was completely new. So again, when God says, "Have no other gods or powers before me," this takes on a deeper meaning in relation to what God's offering us, right? We say in the West, the idiom, "Don't put all your eggs in one basket," right? Don't make it so that everything you need is entrusted to just one source. Diversify your portfolio, right? And that's part of the mentality behind polytheism. Hedge your bets by aligning yourself to several gods or several powers, including yourself. And that way, when one disappoints, you have others to look to. Now, the problem here is the loyalty that's demanded by all these other powers. That can be extremely difficult and draining on us, and we weren't made for that. But this, put all your eggs in one basket kind of trust, that's exactly what God was asking these formerly enslaved Israelites to have for him. To forsake the, I don't know how many gods that they formerly served, right? And he was saying, you got to choose me over them. You have to leave the familiar ways of Egypt. And for what? One God. One egg in the basket. A father, a king, a husband, right? This God that they've heard stories of through their forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, on down the line. And I think you and I are being asked no less than this, right? Because we also have powers and gods, and that includes our own Lone Ranger attitudes of self-sufficiency, right? We have these things that we need to put down and forsake and turn away from in favor of God, only God, his care and his provision, right? So our level of trust in him has to increase to match what we expect him to do for us. So I want to say, no matter how long you've been in this walk, be patient with yourself in this journey, because it's going to take a while. It's like our lifetime to get to that level of trust in God, right? To know that He's with you every step of the way, and these other powers, you don't need them. I think when we know that the Exodus story is our story, this can help us. When we understand that the Exodus story parallels our exodus from slavery to sin and from spiritual orphanhood that I mentioned in an earlier Torah portion. When we see these parallels, when we see how the Exodus story mirrors our story, I think I know for me, it gives me more hope and it gives me more courage to lean in closer to God. So, as we continue through this book of Exodus, pay attention to how God woos His people. Okay? He's showing them who He is. I'm asking you to put all your trust in me. So He's got to say, what is He going to do? Like, is he has to show that He's capable of what He's asking us to trust Him in, right? He proves Himself worthy of allegiance. And in time, we grow in our faith, and we know that He is more than capable of bringing us out, freeing us, redeeming us, taking us as His own. Who is like our God? So I will see you next week in the next Torah portion. And until then, be blessed.
We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussion, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take the tour of the MessianicLambRadio.com website. I'm Susan Hugi, thanking you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.